All right, welcome to episode 2. We're going to be talking about writing a found footage film. It's mostly within the horror genre. I don't know if there's any examples beyond horror. It's really typical there. We see it maybe bits and pieces in some other action or thriller movies, but some of this is based on an interview I did with Christopher Landon, who's written about 4 or 5 of the Paranormal Activity movies. He's also written a new movie called We Have a Ghost.
We have a ghost.
Okay.
No, I'm serious, Kevin. Caught him on camera.
I'm your host, Brock Swinson. I've been with Creative Screenwriting for about 10 years. This is my writing partner, Topher Purdy, who is a big horror fan, to say the least. We've been running a few horror movies recently ourselves. What's your kind of initial take on found footage? Like, was the first one you saw Blair Witch, or what do you think?
It was. I have a very specific memory of watching that when I was probably too young. Let's see, what was I? Maybe 11 years old. Definitely should not have been there on a double bill with The Matrix or something. So just a fun time to be alive, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely like, especially being a young kid, being impressionable, the whole aura around it of, is this real? Is it not real? These people supposedly really disappeared. Added an element to the film that I don't think persists if you try this in another genre. Moonlight like this, you know, it wouldn't have that same kind of like a meta aspect to it, you know, which is so common in the horror genre.
Yeah, I think part of it's like bringing you into the elements of horror and kind of breaking down the fourth wall in a unique way. And that was 1999s. You mentioned The Matrix too. I mean, those movies came out kind of pre-internet. There wasn't so much like, let's go and debunk all this. So they actually marketed that movie in a way where it was very unclear if it was real or not real. They kind of hid the actors and the way they shot it and everything else. So around that time, though, there was a couple scary movies coming out. Horror was kind of being parodied. It was kind of being done to death with some slasher films and Scream and this and that. Found footage seemed to be about inescapable dread and psychological threats rather than one big killer. The group dynamics between 3 characters who sort of blame each other and eventually came together to sort of fight this greater evil. The setup here is that the filmmakers are trying to uncover a mystery and maybe a past wrong, which would be colonialism. There's no scripts. A lot of the frustrations were real. The actors knew they were making a movie, but they didn't know what might actually happen. So when they discovered artifacts or when someone bangs on the tent, it's all real. And that all manifests in the audience, much like Bird Box years later. The Blair Witch is never revealed, just more darkness. And Brian Raftery wrote about this a little bit in his book, Best Movie Year Ever, about movies from 1999.
And I remember around this time, there was a big push for like the actors. Like, they weren't professional actors, weren't people that we'd ever seen or would see for quite a while. Actually encountered one of the actors, and I think he's on like a CSI or something now. That I just saw somebody watching over his shoulder, and I was like, that's the dude from the Blair Witch Project. Sure enough, it was. So it's good to see that they got a career out of it. But at the time, yeah, it definitely leaned into this whole, like we were talking about being a subgenre. It was almost like Cannibal Holocaust back in the day. It was like a cult following that people were like genuinely progressing this as being something that really happened to these people. And it definitely spawned a whole genre of people to do things like this in the coming years. I remember specifically myself, I got a couple years after this came out, probably within the year, if I had to guess, I got a camcorder and went to like a barn down the road and pretended like I was shooting the Blair Witch Project, because it just had that, it has an instantaneous feel like it's something you could reproduce, you know, because it seems so cheap and so easy and practical, and is literally just kind of making it up as you go. It's a very naturalistic form of film, almost a guerrilla filmmaking, if you will. The way it's shot is kind of conducive of the way it was advertised. It was very organic. If I could choose one word, that's how I guess I would describe it.
Yeah, so actually, we're showing us some clips from a Christopher Landon interview in this episode, and he kind of came in to write Paranormal Activity 2, 3, 4, and then a couple other ones after that. But so what he told me was they originally, the studios tried to replicate Paranormal Activity, which was also kind of shot without a script. They kind of just went in there and did it. But without this leader, this Oren Peli, who wasn't attached at the time, it was really kind of just junk. It wasn't really scary. And Christopher Landon got this opportunity. He was pretty much a young writer. He had written Disturbia and a few other things, but to pitch in the room. And he pitched this idea where kind of I think the mom is drugged down the stairs in this one scene. He pitched it just in the room of, what you're doing is not scary enough. This is not going to work. You're missing the whole element behind this. What you're kind of saying is like, it does look easy. It does look like you could just go do it. And maybe if you had unlimited time, and then it's really up to the editor to make it all work. But that rarely comes out successfully. You probably get something with a lot less like dynamic plot and everything else.
Yeah, I remember when the first Paranormal Activity came out, it was maybe 10 years after the Blair Witch Project. So we were all online at that point, and there was like this whole internet campaign of it's only screening at certain times in certain places, but it kind of seemed more tongue in cheek, I guess, for me. I don't know if it was just the fact that I'd already been exposed to so much of it that I knew it's just a marketing ploy, but it definitely had like a word of mouth that caught on almost immediately, which is kind of weird when you consider the fact that it had just been like, what, a decade since we'd seen the Blair Witch Project. So that's interesting. But like you said, making a franchise out of that is kind of an insane concept as a screenwriter. Like if someone came to me with that and was like, okay, write 3 more of these, I would probably be terrified, because the first film, like you were saying, Christopher was referring to, it wasn't necessarily scary in the conventional sense of a horror movie, because it wasn't about someone being attacked, or it was not as much dread. It was more suspense, I guess, in that first one. It was an hour and a half of things falling over in the background, and then you got a 5-minute conclusion. So
even the second one. So the second one starts, they're trying to kind of piece it together with the first one. It's with a new family, but the relatives of the first family, I believe, is the way it's set up. And something it looks like someone ransacks the house, like robbers or destroying things and stuff like that. That's the cause for them to put cameras in, and then we kind of see things from there. And then you really have a lot of just building tension of like a door slowly swinging open and these little bitty things, kind of like Poltergeist or something like that to some degree in the beginning of it. But it just gives you like more room to set up. When I actually asked Christopher that question too, did it feel like limitless? Like you could go anywhere in this new kind of subgenre, or did it feel like you had a lot of constraints? And he kind of felt a mixture of both for this. And people think this is easy, but it's not. And this is kind of what he had to say about that.
A lot of people think found footage looks easy to make. And it is the opposite. I think it's harder to make a found footage film than a traditional film, just because you can't rely on all the sort of tricks and things that you normally have. You don't have coverage. You have to explain why someone's holding a camera, which is impossible sometimes. You don't have a score to help inform how you want to feel in a moment. So there's a lot of things that you're up against when making a movie like that. And again, I think we were all just kind of having fun, trying to figure out how far we could push this thing.
Okay, so the first big one here is like you don't have enough coverage. The way they set that up, like I just said, is they have kind of this thing happens that causes them, we want to film it, we want to record it, we want to see what's going on, and explain all that there. But even that part, like, how are you explaining the first part? Is it just on someone's phone? Are you filming for police evidence? There always has to be some reason behind everything. You can't just get there. Are there some other examples that come to mind? Like, so there's Paranormal Activity, obviously. There's also Cloverfield, VHS, Rec or Record, Blair Witch Project. Any other examples of like how they solve the problem with coverage that come to mind for you?
Yeah, thinking about Record or Rec, whatever you want to call it. It was a great Spanish language horror film from a couple of years back. Definitely something I would recommend to people in general, but it kind of takes the whole investigative journalist approach. It's like we're following the cameraman who works on this TV show. And at night they interview people. I think the name of their late night syndicated TV show is While You Were Asleep. Like they go follow some firemen to see what they do at night while the rest of the town is asleep. And they kind of go with them on a call, and then things escalate from there. Then at that point, it becomes kind of like, you probably heard this a lot in these movies. We have to capture this. We have to show the world what's going on here.
Yeah.
So I think that impetus when you have someone with like a journalistic mindset, I think that's like the most predominant, I guess, going forward with all these, because another movie I actually just watched recently called As Above, So Below kind of has the same thing. They're trying to document the discovery of the Philosopher's Stone, I believe they call it, in the catacombs of Paris. So it gives you a reason to have the camera on at all times, and they have like headlamps, and just how intuitively they can add cameras now, specifically with modern technology, just kind of makes it cool. You can set up some really cool shots. And you can, even with like the head cam, you can do like point of view basically for people now. So that's interesting, and it very much gives it the documentary feel. And I think that's what's kind of unique about these movies. I was listening to a Chuck Klosterman interview on a podcast a couple weeks back. He was talking about movies as dreams, and I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because I think that kind of makes sense if you think about like narrative works. We sit in a dark room, we stare at an illuminated screen, and these things happen, but they don't really happen. It's like we're dreaming. We're watching someone else's dream, waking dreams. But when you go into something like this, like a documentary style, it kind of blurs that line a little bit, kind of takes it away from the dreamlike aspect. It makes it more of a like a newscast almost, you know.
It kind of reminds me of our last conversation about James Cameron and the vignette moments. Because when you leave, it's kind of fuzzy what happened. It depends how deep your movie knowledge is, how much you actually remember when you leave. Because I talked to some family members who don't watch a lot of movies, and I feel like I'm like, do we watch the same thing? Because they only remember a handful of pieces, you know.
Right.
Yeah, like I'm a big fan of Klosterman as well. So I think one like blended way to do this, we see it in other movies. I feel like a lot of Spielberg movies, they might show a camera briefly. I feel like there's something in like War of the Worlds where it's through the eyes of a digital camera. We see bodies disappearing, and it's like that's one of the things Spielberg does to move violence off screen a little bit, though. It's kind of just a tactic within a tactic for him. I think a great example, though, came out in the last couple of years, Archive 81. It does a pretty good job of like, this guy's hired to edit these videos. So half of it is not, it's just a kind of a regular movie. It's about his job and some mysteries and things like that. The other half is him kind of stepping into this world. So it's very blended. It does like give you kind of a shortcut to move in and out of this without having all these coverage problems, though.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of an unconventional approach, and not something we've seen a lot of. This is maybe me misremembering. The second Blair Witch, I think, is not shot as found footage, but I think it might have some allusions to some footage in there. So maybe it's the ancestor of that idea, but it definitely was not done as well as it would be later down the line.
And Archive 81 is a series. I feel like sometimes, though, if I'm watching a found footage movies, if it goes too far out, I'll kind of pop back out of it. I'm like, why the hell would they be filming this part? Because it's really just a plot explainer. It's not really needs to be there, Yeah,
thinking back to record, we had covered it a few months back for the podcast. Where there's a moment there where it's just like this horrible thing had just happened, and the cameraman is kind of like peeking over a window and recording a private conversation for no real good reason, But that's a plot device, kind of like we were just saying with Christopher talking about the challenges of how you have to not only capture all this stuff in basically a single camera, but you have to move the plot along too. So you have to make these things appear as natural as possible. Yeah,
and the word found footage makes you think that it wasn't a lot to work with, as opposed to something like The Office or some of those shows where it's like the gimmick is that they're setting out to make a documentary. So you assume they're filming 10 hours a day, and then some of those things make a little more sense that someone's always watching. Whereas the Blair Witch kind of leans into that, where, Paranormal Activity may not. Like, how many cameras do you actually have in the house? Why is there a camera? Like, we have a small baby, so the camera would be on the crib, not in the other corner of the room where you can see everything, So there's some things like that you just kind of like, okay, that's good, it works for everyone, I guess. And then there's while we're on genres, I had to find out what this is called. It's called Screen Life. So that is when they literally are on, the computer the entire time. A movie called Searching a few years ago, Dark Web, Unfriended Dark Web. Modern Family did an episode like this. I think it feels like an Apple ad kind of to me watching them. But they're interesting that you can do it. And then your limitations are like you can have chat come up and messages, and then how they move around the screen, and you're usually kind of digging into Facebook. It's almost like a stalker approach to something.
I did watch Searching. Was John Cho, I believe, led that one a couple years back. That was actually was really good. I was kind of hesitant because at that point I've seen so much found footage, and then when you kind of start leaning into tech, I know we've talked about this before, that it can go really bad, or it can be really cool and innovative. And I felt like that was definitely a good entry in that genre.
Yeah, the creative constraints are like good and bad. Like that feels like, because it's kind of like there's contained thriller, and then there's found footage maybe, and then there's like within that there's this other smaller thing. You're just putting more and more handcuffs on.
When it took off, it became so mass produced and formulaic that I just got kind of burnt out on it. But the good ones are great, no doubt about that.
Yeah. It does feel like it requires more of your attention until you really do need to be in that dark room and willing to just stare at nothing for, a little bit longer than normal in a movie,
It's definitely not a 2-screen experience. If you're texting during some of it, you're not going to pick up any context from dialogue here. It's like a roller coaster. You either got to strap in or just get off.
So we kind of covered this a little bit already. You don't have coverage, number one. Number two is you have to explain why someone is holding a camera, which Christopher said, which is impossible sometimes. We've kind of gone over that a little bit, but some of those films we just talked about, what are some of the explanations? In Paranormal Activity, they've set up cameras to record the quote paranormal activity. What comes to mind, like for VHS or Record or Cloverfield or some of those for you?
Mostly, I would say documentary style, like we were saying earlier. It's like the investigative journalist is kind of like how the Blair Witch goes to. Like, we're going to go investigate this and document this, and we've got to show the world this. So we have to document everything so we can make our movie, which is interesting. Again, after the mid '90s boom, everything going meta after Scream, it's kind of like a natural evolution. You would assume to, like, let's make a movie about making a movie about horror movies. But I guess, like I said, with that being the convention, when you get unique, or like, I think that's what was cool and unique about Paranormal Activity, was using cameras set up statically, but they was different. It wasn't what we were used to seeing. It wasn't the cameraman following the broadcaster or the documentarian as they describe what we're doing and why we're here and why we're shooting all this stuff. It was kind of like, it was more personal, I guess. It was more in your home, which is super cool.
And some of those, if you're fearing for the cameraman, you're not fearing for yourself as much. Where if you're kind of just watching something, maybe that's a little heightened. You're fearing for the character. Right. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe subconsciously you're more in the room almost with some of those films.
Yeah, it's like kind of like you were referring to a baby monitor earlier. It's like watching your kid on a baby monitor and there's something moving in the room. Is that more terrifying than watching 3 adults run around knowing one's holding the camera? 100%.
Right. So right. Yeah.
They definitely did not get enough credit for bringing that element to the subgenre, I would say.
So why are they holding the camera, which can be impossible? I feel like it's the majority of that is simple enough with one idea, but then there are some connecting tissues. It's going to be really hard to explain. Why is the camera here? And some of those is up to you as a writer to decide, is this good enough for my script? Does this make enough sense? Is it strong enough? The other 90% strong enough that people kind of go along with this little thing. So the third issue is you don't have a score to inform you how you want to feel, how the audience to feel. I don't know if that's always true. Is that always true in found footage, or is that more of a Paranormal Activity limitation?
I think generally it's the way those films are set up. If I think about them, I think about my experience watching those, particularly in a theater. I think about the silence, more than just about anything. Like those moments when something's moving, everyone gets quiet. Like if you're not listening, looking for the score, you probably wouldn't understand the fact that it's not there. But I think with found footage in particular, because of the way you can move a camera, the forgiveness an audience is going to give you for putting it in a situation where it's like, okay, why the hell is there a camera there? It doesn't matter, because the image, I think, is what tells the story more with found footage, and of course the audio of the characters. But I think taking score out of it almost makes it more, particularly for horror, makes it a more frightening experience for me, because it's more, like I said, realistic.
Yeah. Like
when you start putting the polish on it, all the post-production stuff, like documentary style, then to me, that means a filmmaker had his hands on this, as opposed to you just handed me a VHS with some terrible thing I don't want to see on it. It's almost like watching like a news clip of someone being, I don't know, brutalized by someone. It's scary, but if you put the Halloween music behind that, it kind of makes me giggle in a way,
Right. And you still have like the famous scene, the first Paranormal Activity, is like when the mom finally comes up really quickly in front of the face of the camera, or she hits the camera on her back. There's a couple scenes like that towards the end of it. Spoiler if you hadn't seen that in the last 10 years. But I feel like you still get a chance to, you don't get the lead up of a score, but you get the like kind of the bang moment of this, like hitting the camera or hitting something on the table or someone falling down, or whatever, a different kind of jump scare from that.
Yeah, it's more organic. It's more like something you would encounter in real life. Like, right now, if something fell, my head would naturally snap. But if there was a 30-second music cue to make me do it, it's a little bit more corny,
Yeah, the tension moments are different there. It's kind of like, it's almost like a misdirect or smoke and mirrors. There might be slowly a door opens here and something bangs over there, and you really do need the whole scream. I think it is like nice to go see them in a theater, kind of as you mentioned. You really need your full attention, which is something that we're kind of, in general, audiences are going away from. So it's probably why these are getting made, because they appear to be much cheaper. So if you can get them made cheaper, you can maybe get them out there to more people who are really into this sort of thing, and they're going to give you that attention, as opposed to trying to be the next blockbuster or whatever it is.
Right. Like all horror should be experienced in a packed theater. It's the best way, no doubt about it.
Yeah. So that's kind of the top big 3 reasons that kind of Christopher gave. We kind of went through those to go all the way back to 99, which is, well over 20 years ago now. There's a lot of things that made the Blair Witch work, and they made these other films work. So the big question is like, how do you do all this today? Like, how do you do this well today? You can't really market it in the same way. It's got to be pretty clean. It's got to be pretty original, pretty fresh. You have to explain these three ideas pretty well. I'm wondering if there's going to be like hybrid models. I think of like the British, is it called CCTV, the like closed captioning? They have
Right,
videos
yeah.
everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw like a slasher film through the eyes of all surveillance, like almost like a silent film going through and cutting pieces like that together. Like I don't know
Right.
where else this genre can go that it hasn't already been, unless we're 10 years from now, we truly are all wearing Google Glass or whatever it is, and
Yeah,
then
that's what I
everything's
was
kind of
thinking.
reflected that way.
I think, yeah, the only way that the next step, I guess, in the evolution is kind of one of the questions we didn't have a great answer for during the conversation, was about why do people keep recording? Why would something keep recording? And I think changing the cameraman or finding a unique cameraman might be the next best thing,
Yeah, so either you've got something like that, like almost like a third party or an AI or something, mass appeal like that, or you just really have a deeply motivated cameraman, like he's out to solve his wife's murder or whatever. Whatever. Why is he filming that? I don't know, but there's
Yeah.
got to be some connection to that makes sense, and I got to buy into it like pretty much in the trailer, not even in the movie. Like I need to buy into it before I buy a
Right.
ticket to something like that.
Because if I pitch you on that, I'm like, all right, give me $20, you're gonna hesitate probably.
So what's like we kind of talked through these. There's hundreds of examples, dozens of maybe good examples. What's kind of your overall impression now that we've kind of went through this about film footage?
The question of, is it easier? Is it harder to make this as opposed to any other type of film? I think the cons are definitely there, and the pros are definitely there. And I think probably on a long enough timeline, it evens itself out. Production value, of course, people are going to put money in actors on TV, on the screen, things we want to see, and make it interesting and try to do something unique. No one's out to make the worst movie of all time. Everyone's doing what they can. So I think some of the limitations that we were talking about are kind of beneficial in a way, depending on your audience. Again, this is very much, it's a niche of a niche audience. So you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're making this. You're generally marketing towards people who are big horror fans, and even within that, you're going to lose some just based on your style here. I think it could go either way. You can make an argument either way, no doubt about it. But for me personally, I think it's been done a lot, and it's hard to get excited when I see something's going to be presented this way. But I definitely think there's still room for growth, and whoever hits on the next big one will make a ton of money with probably a very small budget. So good luck to them.
I do also think, kind of adding to what you just said, is thinking about this from a writer perspective, is that it feels like it's more about all the time that you're thinking about writing as opposed to writing. I feel like that stuff would come pretty quick, and the tension's kind of there, and the script's probably a bit shorter page-wise, but it's really more about you coming up with all these creative solutions when you're out hiking or doing the dishes or whatever, and it's more
Right.
about that part and coming out, oh, this would be cool. So it may be something where like you're writing two scripts at one time, and this is kind of your side project to figure out these weird solutions of like explaining why these things are happening, as opposed to every little line of dialogue or something like that has to be perfect, where it doesn't feel as important as other scripts. At least just kind of my thinking on it.
Right. I think thinking about the genre in general, my question going into like the thought experiment was, does someone write a found footage movie, or does someone write a movie and determine that it works better as found footage? Like,
Right.
What's the natural progression there?
Yeah. All right. That is episode 2, our found footage episode. Go down to the bottom. Let us know. You can go back and read the interview I did with Christopher Landon about Paranormal Activity 2, and also his new film on Netflix, We Have a Ghost. You see some other links to Creative Screenwriting below, and let us know in the comments what you thought about this. Are we on point, off point? Did we say anything stupid? Did we say anything smart? What do you like? What could we use more of? You have any future ideas for future episodes we could possibly do? Go back and watch the first episode about James Cameron and Avatar 2, and kind of all where that multiverse is possibly going. And stay tuned for episode 3. We'll be talking about our kind of Oscar picks and what we think about the Oscar nominees and who might win in our next episode. Thanks.